Glance Technologies owns and operates Glance Pay, a disruptive mobile payment technology now live in 16 cities in Canada and about to launch in the US. With revenues up 664% in the last quarter, Glance Technologies has the potential to be a worldwide leader in an industry projected to grow to $1.3 trillion in 3 years. Glance Technologies stock symbols are GLNFF in the US and GET in Canada. Find out more at glancepay.com.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Stewart Muir, Executive Director of the ResourceWorks Society, his website, resourceworks.com. Welcome back to the show, Stewart.
Thanks, Jim.
Right now, we're in the Battle of Alberta versus BC over bitumen. I have a feeling that we won't hear any choruses of solidarity forever between the two NDP caucuses in Alberta and BC.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, it is unfortunate to see two neighboring provinces to be pitted against each other. The funny thing is that Alberta and Saskatchewan, who politically are anything but allies, the Saskatchewan Party is a conservative, farther to the right, and of course the Alberta NDP is on the other end of the spectrum. But all of a sudden, they find themselves joined at the hip on the market access for Canadian energy products, and BC the one standing in the way of that.
So, first of all, what's BC's premise here? What are they trying to do?
Well, I think BC has decided they're going to try the proposition that a province within Confederation is the boss of Canada, which is legally interesting. You know, Tom Berger, who is a lawyer in his 80s who's devoted his life to fighting energy development in Canada. He was in the Mackenzie Valley Pipeline dispute for a long time, and that eventually wasn't built. Now he's been asked to turn his hand to stopping the prosperity that will flow from getting fair global value for Canadian crude oil. And, he's like the billion-dollar man, except with a minus beside the $1 billion, because he's got the mission to prevent Canadians from having billions of dollars of schools, hospitals, and other benefits every year. So, truly the negative $1 billion man set to work on this file.
So BC's taken the position that they're not going to allow any bitumen to be shipped?
They've taken the position that there need to be some standards applied to understanding the possibilities of what could happen in hypothetical scenarios, because they are wanting to make the argument that part of approving the pipeline, which is federally approved by Ottawa, hasn't been done to their satisfaction. Although we know that that's not really about that, because they told us during the election campaign that they would just use every tool they could find in their toolbox to stop the pipeline, which they don't want under any circumstances. So really, it's just another tool they've reached for. Whether they're sincere about these beliefs seems rather up for question, since they've already stated that it's not about the safety of bitumen. It's just they don't want the pipeline, and they'll do whatever they can to stop it.
Alberta is threatening court action, saying it's unconstitutional for a province to try to override a federal decision.
Yes, and I think the BC government is possibly thinking, well, who knows where it's going to land. They're probably right that, yeah, it is federal, it is constitutional problem, but you know what? We're just going to slow down the proponent, and we're going to hope they get frustrated and go away, and then the whole problem is solved, and we won't have the problem of the enhanced prosperity that comes from being an energy player, and we'll be able to kind of reset our expectations as a country, as a kind of a place of less activity, maybe more parks, and just a general lower standard of living.
Well, Trans Mountain has said they lose $75 million a month. That with the delays over the pipeline. Mm-hmm. Canada is about to sign on to the Transpacific Partnership, which I believe allows a company to sue a government for any losses that government might cause that company.
Well, I think the international dimension is a very interesting one. I mean, what I think this also equates to is how can we help Saudi Arabia to become a richer country? How can we help countries like Libya, Angola, Venezuela become wealthier countries. This is the kind of policy, if that's what you want, then keep the oil in Canada landlocked so it can't get to market. Stop that infrastructure from being built, and you will for sure create better economic prospects for countries like those ones.
What are some of the myths that are being perpetrated about bitumen in this fight?
Well, I think the biggest one that sort of caught on is that unlike any oil, whether it's the oil in your salad dressing, take out a bottle of salad dressing and see what happens when you shake it around. If the laws of physics apply in your house, and they do, that oil, it's going to float to the top, and that's what oil does. And that's just simple physics and chemistry. And the same is true of Canadian crude oil in the form of bitumen. There's been they call it a demarketing campaign. The American foundations have spent more than $100 million over the last few years on a very specific strategy to demarket Canadian oil, to besmirch it and lower it in the minds of Canadians, so that we have a sort of cultural cringe about our own products that are actually really high quality ones, and create the false narrative that there's something to be especially feared about our crude oil. So they've got this dilbit thing going on. The science, which is in the National Energy Board files, when they approved the Kinder Morgan pipeline, it shows very clearly that dilbit. Now, bear in mind, I don't want to see any oil spilled anywhere, and I believe that humans can manage the risk. But suppose it happens, dilbit behaves really the same as any other crude oil of its class, And again, you don't want that stuff in the water, and that's the whole point of spending $1.5 billion on the Ocean Protection Plan, to stop that from happening. And that's what we have coming into place. They're building this week at Nanaimo. There's work being done on the spill response station. So we need that stuff. But the fact is, crude oil, call it dilbit, besmirch it if you will. But the fact is, it'll do the same thing that the oil in your salad dressing will do when you shake it around. That oil, it's going to come on top of the water.
Isn't bitumen the same kind of oil Mexico and Venezuela export?
Yeah, there's heavy oil. I mean, there's different classes of oil. Once you get into that, you realize that there's all kinds of different grades of oil. They have different prices. They're used for different things. There are even special refineries that are only for heavy oil, like we produce in the oil sands. And on the Gulf Coast of the U.S., the Gulf of Mexico, you have these refineries that have been built that are precisely for those heavier oils, and they really need our oil of that quality, which I think is one reason why Americans are probably okay with us here not having a pipeline to the coast, so we can get better value and get better returns for Canadian people, because they would rather have a cheaper supply of Canadian crude to those refineries they've invested in. And why wouldn't they?
Hasn't a lot of the propaganda against Canadian natural gas and oil also been paid for by Arab oil states?
I'd love to see the evidence for that. I think there's probably some truth in that, but I would hesitate until I actually, saw the paper trail to take a firmer position. But, it certainly stands to reason that the world of competition, we've seen evidence, it's been in the U.S. Senate, that shows Russia has been investing in some of the demarketing of oil and gas from its competitors in the European space. And, that's a pretty compelling argument. And, I think the Saudis, they are totally dependent on oil. Unlike the diversified Canadian economy, where we have a lot going on, they really just have one thing going on, and it wouldn't be at all surprising if they fought very hard to protect it. And they are not a democracy. We don't have any transparency as to what their actions or intentions are on things. They just do what they do. And who knows what that is.
Do you think Ottawa will play the upper hand here and finally say enough is enough, let's get this thing done?
Well, there's going to be a lot of people saying to Ottawa, you should do that. And, as a matter of opinion, I suppose I would come down on that side, that they should exert the primacy of the federal crown, because it's what the Constitution says. I mean, a school child could read a Constitution and see this is the case. Now, of course, this will be settled by constitutional law experts, and I'm not one of those. But, when it comes to what Canada needs to survive, the favorite phrase that I think of is from an eminent economist who I've gotten to know in our project of Resource Works, who likes to put it this way. Crude oil exports are how we pay the rent in Canada. And the reason for that is we just get such a great return when we export. And we get, last 3 years, for example, we had net exports valued at $140 billion just from our crude oil. And that's what pays for all of these social benefits. It's why we have the ability to defend our borders with the military. We've got the Coast Guard. We were able to fly the Prime Minister around the world in a plane the size of your house, my house, and a couple of other houses, and do so knowing that with the little tiny population that Canada has, what are we, under 40 million? We don't really belong in the G7 with that population, but we are in it. And do you know why? We're in it because of our natural resources. And if we make the choice or are forced to abandon that, we're really abandoning the basis of our global influence, our ability to be an emblem, a beacon of prosperity and democracy to the world. We're just walking away from that, and that's the consequence of choosing to exit the global natural resource world. And it would really be, I think, not what voters chose. I think they would have felt duped if all of these choices start to add up to the erosion of Canadian prosperity that is the trajectory that this BC action places us on. And that's why, those who are really concerned about the future of sustainability, of prosperity, we don't want to see Venezuelan products outcompete ours because they are trashing their environment, whereas we're doing the opposite. We're enhancing. We're leaving things better than they were before they were developed. And you can only, you can see that if you go to these places, as I've done around Canada, where we develop energy.
We'll have more with Stewart Muir right after this.
I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese, Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, A-M-Y, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Arctic Star Exploration, operated by a team of proven mine finders, is focused on diamonds in Finland and the Northwest Territories of Canada. A work program is planned for our Finland property that contains diamond-bearing kimberlite. Arctic Star trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol ADD, and the Frankfurt Exchange, symbol 82A1. Please visit our website at arcticstar.ca or call us at 604-689-1799.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Stewart Muir. Stewart, First Nations people do not want to be welfare junkies, do they?
No, and I think there is some mythology in urban Canada. It's been perpetuated by kind of paternalistic approach that we historically have had for a long time. The residential schools, that terrible stain on Canada, which so many of us are working to heal. They don't want that to be the future. And wherever I go in my work, and I travel a lot around Canada, I talk to First Nations Aboriginal leaders to find out what can we do, what can I do, and what can others be asked to do. And I was speaking with Chief Bob Joseph last week in Vancouver at a conference, and he talks about the pain and even the hatred that has been out there historically. These are the true blocks to getting past an era that we would prefer to forget. And I think that's really at the heart of it, even before I get into specifics on, the economy and jobs. It's really a healing that we have to go through.
Well, you've talked to a lot of First Nations people who want to see resource development. Their whole lifestyle depends on sustainability. Isn't that what they want? Sustainable resources and jobs. Well,
last week I interviewed Calvin Helene, who's an author, entrepreneur. He is from the Tsimshian Greater Nation, the Lax Kw'alaam group near Prince Rupert. And he is, I would say, he's angry. He's angry about some of the moves out of Ottawa to limit access for First Nations to the kind of lifestyle and prosperity that all other Canadians have.
In other words, Ottawa wants them to be kept on welfare and off the workforce?
Well, I doubt you'd find anyone in Ottawa who would say, yeah, that's what we want, but that's what is the result of these policies we're seeing. And, Calvin talked to me about the 90% unemployment across most of the North in First Nations territory, which is just wrong, like indefensible. And he's looking at policies, deliberate policies by Ottawa to keep the economy of Northern BC from being developed by First Nations on their terms, using their environmental practices that have for 13,000 years allowed them to be successful on the land, to be denied opportunities. And there is a growing, I think, movement of unease that the Eastern elites should just simply not merely ignore the West, well, we're used to that, but to actively pass laws to keep people down. It's disgraceful.
Now, it seems to me every time, a pipeline is proposed or some other development, there's always people with drums banging away saying they're against it. Are they a minority but very vocal, and that's the image that you get?
Yep. That's what I hear. I've been speaking with leaders, Indigenous leaders, last week from Tuktoyaktuk to Tofino, a great expanse of the west and the north of Canada, and they share an anger and growing unease with the limitations being placed on them by the elites, and they're not going to take it anymore. They are rising up. It's not maybe so obvious to everyone in the cities who doesn't have the opportunities that I've been having the last few years to go out and get to know what First Nations are seeking. But I'll tell you this, they have a crystal clear vision. We have young people, young leaders, Indigenous leaders who are at home on the streets of London or New York as they are in the bush of the Yukon. These are international global citizens who are incredibly well educated and fiercely passionate about preserving the culture, heritage, language of their people. They're different from, I would say, some of the generations before them. There's no ceiling on the future they can imagine for themselves, except what's being placed on them by some leaders who have a narrow and parched view of what Canada can be. And I think this is what is driving the heartfelt frustrations that I'm hearing about wherever I go today.
We'll have more with Stewart Muir right after this.
I'm Brian Fowler, president of Blind Creek Resources Limited, listed on the TSX Venture Exchange, ticker symbol BCK. Blind Creek is focused in the Yukon, Northwest Territories, and British Columbia. The company's key property is the Blend Project, one of the largest undeveloped lead-zinc-silver deposits in Western Canada, plus plans to advance the recently acquired, fully permitted historic engineered gold mine in the Atlan District of Northwestern BC. Check us out at blindcreekresources.com.
Keep informed. Receive our weekly recap of thought-provoking articles, podcasts, and radio delivered to your inbox for free. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage, HowStreet.com. Welcome back. We're chatting with Stewart Muir. Stewart, electric cars, they tell us it's the wave of the future. Europe has mandated them to be the only vehicles to be around, I think, in 20 years. But how realistic is it, and how affordable are they for the regular person right now?
Well, don't you get a little shudder when you see a little shiver of delight when you see the Tesla coming? Shiny, no grill on it. It's kind of sleek. It's got those handles. Kind of sends a little thrill up your spine, doesn't it? Come on, Jim. You can admit it to me.
Well, one of our regular interviewees here owns a Tesla, and he really enjoys it, and he says I'm the one who sold him on buying it because he was tired of the high cost of tune-ups, and with an electric car the only fluid you have to replace is the windshield washer fluid. And
the fluids of the driver.
Yeah, I guess.
Yes. Well, once they're autonomous, you won't have to worry about what kind of fluids there are either, I presume. Like, how will this work? Will there be, drink driving laws? If the car is in charge and you've had a couple and you get behind the wheel or in the passenger seat and no one's behind the wheel.
Or you're in the back seat.
Yeah. So what then? Like, are you okay to let that thing taxi you home safely if you got pulled over? What's the law going to be on that, Jim?
Well, they have to change the law.
Okay.
And have you locked yourself out? Like, I've turned the car on and I've told it, take me home. And beyond that, I have no control whatsoever.
Yeah, well, I've seen Space Odyssey 2001, or is it 2001 Space Odyssey as well? Yeah. And I'd be a little bit worried about who was it, Harold taking over?
Yeah. Well, or the joke you get on, welcome aboard the first 100% automated airline flight. Nothing can go wrong. Go wrong. Go wrong.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. But still, we know machines can be very safe. SkyTrain in Greater Vancouver, fatality-free when the train is running. We're not talking about the people who jump in front of it. But a train robot can stop much faster than a human can react to something on the tracks. So the only accidents they've had with SkyTrain are when it's been under human control in the switching yard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
So we know the technology can work.
No passengers. It would be just impeccable.
Yeah.
All the time.
So,
but we tend to associate automation and all that with electric cars, but the big thing with electric cars is more on the emissions and their use or non-use of fuel and other inputs. And
where's all the power for these electric cars going to come from? Aren't they going to put a huge strain on the grid?
I like you, as a journalist, I'm a natural skeptic. I never believe what I see. I have to submit it to my famous BS detector. You know what the BS stands for? We don't need to say. And my detector was going off whenever I was looking at electric cars, so I started to look into it a little bit more, and I found out a few things I want to talk about. Where does the power come from? Good question, because an electric car is only as green as the power that has been used from the grid to charge it up. And if you have, like in BC, where we're building Green Power Site C, we got 97% green electricity supply, you can be reasonably sure that that electricity is green, and you can feel good about it, right?
That's the theory.
Well, wrong actually, because overnight, I'll tell you a little secret. The BC Hydro energy planners, what they do, because water is a precious resource. You don't want to spill it over the dam if you don't have to make electricity. If you've got a cheaper alternative, and we do at nighttime, when Alberta, with all its coal generation, isn't using as much coal, they can't turn off the coal plants. It doesn't work that way with coal. They always got to be on. You can't just stop, switch them off like you can with natural gas. They got to keep selling it. So they pour that Alberta coal electricity onto the grid, and it goes for like pennies. And so we're using that. I think over time we'll have less of it because Alberta's trying to get the carbon out of its electricity system. But the fact is, if you're in Kitsilano plugging in your Tesla, you're doing it with Alberta coal at night. How'd you like that? Partially, anyways. Now, if you're in New Brunswick or Nova Scotia, Saskatchewan, Alberta, of course, you're also you're totally dependent on coal in those places. So I would say that a lot of people would say, look, I drive a Tesla, I know that, but I like it because I don't have to pay for gasoline, and there's no tailpipe emissions, so I'm not creating localized pollution. Maybe the pollution's somewhere else where the coal plant is, and that's fine. That's an argument for sure. But I think there's some other things about electric cars that, as we are, entranced by them, I can't figure something out. Can't figure this out, Jim. If they're so great, why isn't everyone buying them? 10 years ago in BC, for every car, like a sedan, that was sold, there was one truck or SUV that was purchased. 10 years later, 2017, as of the end of last year, for every conventional car style sold, 2.6 SUVs and trucks were sold. So drive around. You can see everyone's in a truck or SUV now, right? Fewer and fewer cars. It's true. And you got to ask, why is that? Why are people choosing to use things that are inherently more energy intensive because they're bigger? Why are they doing that? Well, I think part of it is cheaper gas, but I think it's also that they're not ready to take that jump into electric cars. So this is a problem for the electric car industry, And I think they've been quite successful in persuading politicians. Recently in Ottawa, they declared that the senior mandarins, the politicians using a government car, would have to use an electric car or hybrid, or a couple of choices in that sort of no gasoline area. And that's because they want to publicize the idea and make it known to the populace that we should be doing that too. But why aren't people doing it? They're not, So here's what I'm thinking. I'm going somewhere with this, Jim.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, here's what I'm thinking. If they really want to make a difference, they should also consider in Ottawa, when they make these policies, what drives the Canadian economy. Because the two biggest exports we have are, number one, crude oil. Number two, automobiles that we make in Canada. And a lot of these electric cars, at least right now, are made in other countries where they're heavily subsidized. Right now in Victoria, they are putting into service a Chinese-made electric bus. Now, the reason they have electric buses in China is because at certain times of the year in a city like Beijing, you can barely see your hand at the end of your arm due to the air pollution. And so they quite rightly said, we need to fix that. And so they're bringing in electric buses. That's great. Now, in Victoria, the only reason you could ever not see the end of your arm is if they turn out the lights at the Empress Hotel, afternoon tea, and you can't see the end of your arm then. Otherwise, there's really no air pollution of any kind. There's no problem. But nevertheless, there's a sort of allure of the electric bus that the regional government has developed, and they want to show their, I guess, energy virtue by getting one of these and spending 4 times as much as it would cost to buy a regular one. So there's a little bit of that going on, which is costing the taxpayer a lot of money, and who knows whether it will even be, an effective trial. And, I think, what if Ottawa said, okay, we're going to ask the automobile manufacturers in Canada, and we're going to ask the energy producers, oil and natural gas, because that can be a car fuel too, to show us how they're innovating, becoming world leaders in making better use of the fuels we have that people trust. If you have to drive in a remote area to get to your work or get your family somewhere, right now, people are going to choose a fuel type in their car that's reliable, number one, and affordable. So if they can promote those values, increase the performance of fuels, lower the negatives, the, CO2 and other pollutants that come from fossil fuels, and allow our number one export industry to become more successful, then that will be good for all Canadians. And
what about fuels? What about fuel cells? They don't pollute.
Fuel cells, I love fuel cells. And, like the Australians say, they have a saying, horses for courses. So you find the right use for the right technology, and that's how you make it work. But if you choose the wrong fix for the wrong problem, you're just wasting money. And I think one of the important things is to do that. So there was a little footnote in the Ottawa policy on the move to electric cars, which was, and by the way, if you're the military or the RCMP or the Coast Guard, you don't have to worry about any of this. You can just go on doing what you're doing, which is another way of saying, you know what? When push comes to shove, when lives are at stake, we're not doing any of this electric car stuff. We're going to use things that work, right?
Stuart, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Thank you.
My guest has been Stewart Muir, Executive Director of the ResourceWorks Society. Their website, resourceworks.com. You're listening to HowStreet.com radio. Find us on Twitter at HowStreet. Our very popular YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Questions for the show or our guests can be sent to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.